All right, so you're ready to get your hands dirty and start a garden.
Awesome.
Whether you've got acres of land or just a sunny balcony, we're diving into the basics of natural gardening today
Okay.
to help you grow a thriving, eco-friendly space.
Sounds great.
Think of it as a crash course in getting started,
Right?
covering everything from figuring out your space
Yeah.
to grabbing the tools you actually need.
Uh-huh.
No gimmicks here.
What's fascinating is how many different ways there are to garden naturally.
Yeah.
We'll be focusing on approaches that work with nature's processes,
Okay.
not against them.
So not just sticking a plant in the ground,
Exactly.
more like setting up a mini ecosystem.
Yes.
And the first step in all the source material
Yeah.
is all about assessing your space.
Okay.
I was surprised by how much more there is to it than just square footage.
Absolutely.
Like a tiny urban balcony is going to need different strategies
Yeah.
than a sprawling rural plot.
Right.
But no matter the size, you got to consider sunlight, wind,
Yeah.
and what your soil's like.
These factors create your garden's own little microclimate,
Okay.
which can vary even within a small area.
So even on a balcony, a south-facing spot
Yes.
gets way more sun than one facing north.
Exactly.
I never really thought about it like that.
And if you're in a windy high-rise, certain plants might need extra protection.
Oh yeah, good point.
The source material had some clever examples of people adapting to these microclimates.
Oh really?
Like, I saw someone using reflective surfaces on a shady balcony
Wow.
to boost sunlight.
That's pretty ingenious.
Yeah.
Really thinking outside the box?
Mm-hmm.
Or the planter?
Right.
But what about soil?
Well,
I know that's important, but
Mhm.
honestly, it all just looks like dirt to me.
that's where a lot of people get tripped up.
Yeah.
But understanding your soil is crucial.
Okay.
It determines how well your plants can access water and nutrients.
So it's important.
Think of it like this.
No.
If you were a plant, would you rather live in a fluffy bed or a compacted brick?
Definitely a fluffy bed.
Exactly.
So how can we tell what kind of soil we have? The source material mentioned something about a jar test.
Yeah.
Is that a real thing?
The jar test is a simple but effective way to see your soil's composition.
Okay.
You shake up soil and water in a jar
Huh?
and watch how the particles settle.
Right.
A lot of sand at the bottom means you have sandy soil, which drains quickly.
Okay.
If it's mostly clay at the bottom, you got clay soil,
Yeah.
which can hold water but gets compacted easily.
Gotcha.
Ideally, you want a good mix.
Okay.
That's your loamy soil,
Loamy soil.
the holy grail for gardeners.
All right, loamy soil, got it.
Mm-hmm.
But what if my soil isn't perfect?
Yeah.
Can I actually change it?
You absolutely can.
Okay.
And this is where one of the most essential materials for a natural gardener comes in.
All right, lay it on me.
Compost.
Compost.
Yeah.
The gardener's gold.
Exactly.
I've heard so much about it, but isn't it a pain to make?
Not at all.
Really?
Composting is incredibly beneficial.
Right.
And honestly, pretty easy once you get the hang of it.
All right.
It reduces waste, nourishes the soil, and supports those awesome little microorganisms that keep everything in balance.
Okay.
And did you know that using compost can increase yields by up to 30%,
Wow, 30%.
while reducing the need for chemical fertilizers?
That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got our space assessed,
Oh,
and we're
good.
starting to get a feel for our soil.
All right.
What about the tools?
Yeah.
I get overwhelmed looking at all the fancy stuff in garden catalogs.
Mm-hmm.
What do I actually need to get started?
You're right. There's a lot of marketing out there trying to convince you to buy every gadget under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, a good hand trowel,
Okay.
sturdy gloves,
All right.
pruning shears,
Okay.
and a garden fork will get you pretty far.
Really just those four things?
Yep.
I thought I'd need a whole shed full of tools.
Mm.
Okay, good to know.
And when choosing your tools, prioritize quality and durability.
Okay.
Think stainless steel over flimsy plastic.
Okay.
It's less wasteful in the long run.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Think of it as an investment.
So we've covered assessing our space,
Mm-hmm.
understanding our soil,
Yeah.
and gathering the essential tools.
Right.
Anything else we should think about before we actually start planting?
One thing that's often overlooked is mulch.
Mulch?
Yeah.
What is that?
Mulch is like a protective blanket for your soil,
Oh, okay.
helping conserve moisture,
Huh?
suppress those pesky weeds,
Right.
and add more organic matter as it breaks down.
So it's like wood chips or
There are so many different types of mulch out there.
Okay.
Like straw bark chips, even shredded leaves.
So it's both functional and stylish.
Exactly.
I love that. And sounds like we've covered all the bases
We have.
for getting started with a natural garden.
Remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
You're always learning, adapting, and evolving with your garden.
Yeah, for sure.
But with these basics in place, you'll be well on your way to creating a thriving, eco-friendly space.
This has been a fantastic start.
It has.
Now I'm wondering,
Yeah.
what are some simple, maybe even unexpected things we can do to attract those helpful wildlife you mentioned earlier?
Oh, that's a great question.
We'll have to delve into that next time.
Sounds good.
But for now, let's take a quick break,
All right.
and we'll be back with more on natural gardening.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back. We've covered a lot of ground, from understanding your space
Right.
to those essential tools and materials.
Yeah.
But now I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier, working with nature
Yeah.
instead of against it.
Okay.
What does that actually look like in practice?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to some really interesting techniques.
Okay.
One that comes to mind is companion planting.
Companion planting.
Have you ever heard of that?
I have.
Okay.
Like plants have their own social network. Some are best friends,
Exactly.
others not so much.
It sounds whimsical, but there's actual science behind it.
Oh, really?
Certain plants release chemicals that can either attract or repel insects, affecting their neighbors.
Okay.
For instance, planting basil alongside tomatoes can help ward off those pesky whiteflies.
So it's like building a little plant army,
Yeah,
strategically placing your troops to protect each other.
that's a great way to think about it.
That's awesome.
And you can use this to your advantage.
Like how?
Want to attract beneficial insects like ladybugs who munch on aphids. Plant some dill or fennel nearby.
Do they come and eat the bad bugs?
Exactly. It's a natural, eco-friendly way to manage pests.
That's way cooler than using pesticides.
Right.
It's amazing how much wisdom there is
Yeah,
in observing nature
absolutely.
and learning from these plant relationships.
And this idea of observing and working with nature
Yeah.
leads us to another fascinating technique,
Okay, what's that?
biointensive gardening.
Biointensive gardening.
It's all about maximizing yields, especially if you have limited space,
Okay.
which seems relevant for our listeners with balconies or small gardens.
Maximizing yield sounds good to me.
Right.
I'm all about getting the most out of my garden,
Yeah,
no matter the size.
exactly.
How does biointensive gardening actually work?
So one of the core principles is double digging,
Double digging.
which is essentially preparing the soil much deeper than you normally would.
Okay.
We're talking about loosening and aerating the soil down to about 24 inches.
24 inches deep.
It sounds like a lot of work, but there's a reason for it.
So it's more than just skimming the surface. You're really going deep.
You're going deep.
I'm intrigued, but honestly, my back is already aching just thinking about it.
I hear you. It can be labor intensive,
Yeah.
but the payoff is worth it.
Okay.
When you loosen the soil that deeply, you're creating a much larger space for roots to grow.
So the roots can really spread out.
Exactly. Which means stronger plants and higher yields.
Oh, I like that.
Plus, all that extra space is a haven for beneficial microorganisms,
Oh, right. All those little guys.
boosting soil health even further.
So it's not just about the plants.
Right.
It's about creating a thriving ecosystem below the surface.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Does biointensive gardening involve anything else besides the double digging?
It does.
Okay.
Another key element is close plant spacing.
Close plant spacing.
Now, this might sound counterintuitive, but the idea is to strategically space your plants closer together
Okay.
than you normally would,
How close are we talking?
almost like a living puzzle.
Wouldn't that make them compete for resources?
That's a common misconception.
Hmm.
When done correctly, close spacing can actually benefit the plants.
Oh, interesting.
For one thing, it helps shade the soil.
So less sun beating down on them.
Exactly, which means less water evaporation and fewer weeds.
Ah, so it's like they're creating their own little microclimate down there,
Right.
working together to stay cool and hydrated.
Precisely. And the close spacing also encourages the plants to grow upward
Okay.
rather than sprawling outward.
So you get taller plants.
Yes, which again can be great for those with limited space.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
This is blowing my mind.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much there is to learn about natural gardening techniques.
Right.
Before we move on, is there anything else we should know about biointensive gardening?
One last thing to remember is that it's a holistic system. It emphasizes composting, companion planting, and natural pest control methods.
So everything's connected.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all about working with nature, not against it.
This has been incredibly insightful. It's given me a whole new perspective on how to approach gardening in a more sustainable and productive way.
I'm glad to hear that.
Are there any other techniques out there that work with nature in a similar way?
There are. We could spend hours discussing them.
Oh, I bet.
But one that stands out is permaculture.
Permaculture.
Which takes this concept of working with nature to a whole new level.
Yeah. It's about designing gardens that mimic natural ecosystems.
So like a mini forest in your backyard.
Creating sustainable and self-sufficient spaces.
Permaculture. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something I read in the source material about designing gardens that can actually improve the ecosystem around them.
Absolutely.
Is that something we could delve into next?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we can unpack the core principles of permaculture.
Okay.
And explore some practical examples.
Awesome.
It might just revolutionize the way you think about gardening.
Welcome back. I'm still reeling from all this incredible information about biointensive gardening and companion planting.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's amazing how much we can learn from observing nature.
It is.
And working with it instead of against it.
Absolutely. And speaking of working with nature, that's the perfect segue into permaculture.
Okay, permaculture.
Which takes this concept to a whole new level.
You mentioned it earlier.
Yes.
And it really piqued my interest.
The source material hinted at it being a way to design gardens that actually improve the surrounding ecosystem. Yeah. Is that even possible?
Absolutely. Permaculture is all about creating sustainable and self-sufficient systems.
Wow.
That mimic natural ecosystems.
Okay.
It's not just about growing food.
Right.
It's about designing a whole interconnected web of life.
So it's like taking it to the next level.
Exactly.
Like thrives in harmony with its environment.
Yes.
Wow, that sounds incredibly ambitious.
It can be.
Where do we even begin with something like that?
Well, permaculture is guided by a set of ethical principles and design principles, which might sound intimidating, but they're really just common sense guidelines for creating a more sustainable and regenerative way of living.
So it's not just about the garden itself.
Right.
It's about a whole philosophy of living in harmony with nature.
Exactly. But let's focus on the practical application in gardening.
Okay.
One of the key principles is observing and interacting with nature.
Like we talked about with companion planting.
Exactly. Before you even start planting, spend some time observing your space.
Okay.
How does the sun move across your garden?
Right.
Where does water naturally flow? What kind of wildlife already exists there?
So it's about paying attention to the natural patterns and rhythms of your space.
Yes.
Before you impose your own design.
Precisely. And once you have a good understanding of your site, you can start designing your garden in a way that integrates seamlessly with these natural elements.
So instead of fighting against a shady spot, maybe I could embrace it.
Exactly.
And choose plants that thrive in the shade.
That's the idea. It's about working with what you have.
Makes sense.
Not trying to force something that doesn't naturally belong.
Okay.
Another key principle is catching and storing energy and resources.
So like what?
This could mean installing a rain barrel to collect rainwater for irrigation.
Oh, yeah.
Using mulch to conserve soil moisture.
Okay.
Or even designing your garden to maximize passive solar gain in the winter.
It's like creating a closed loop system where nothing goes to waste. That's incredible.
It is.
I'm starting to understand why permaculture gardens are often described as edible ecosystems.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And speaking of edible ecosystems, another important principle is valuing diversity.
Diversity.
A permaculture garden isn't just rows of vegetables.
Okay.
It's a vibrant tapestry of different plants.
So like a mix of everything.
Exactly. From fruit trees and berry bushes to herbs, flowers, and ground covers.
That sounds beautiful.
It is.
But is there a practical reason for all that diversity?
Absolutely. The more diverse your garden, the more resilient it will be to pests and diseases.
Oh, interesting.
Different plants attract different beneficial insects.
Okay.
Creating a natural balance that keeps things in check.
So less of a chance for an infestation.
Right. Plus, the variety of plants provides different habitats for wildlife, making your garden a haven for biodiversity.
So it's not just about growing food for ourselves.
Yeah.
It's about creating a thriving ecosystem that supports a whole community of life.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's what permaculture is all about. Designing systems that benefit both humans and nature.
It's a win-win.
It's a holistic approach that acknowledges our interconnectedness with the natural world.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It has.
I'm feeling so inspired to start incorporating these permaculture principles into my own garden.
Good.
And I know our listeners must be feeling the same way.
I hope so. Remember, you don't need acres of land to practice permaculture.
That's good to know.
Even a small balcony or patio can be transformed into a thriving, eco-friendly space.
That's so encouraging. It makes sustainable gardening accessible to everyone.
Yes.
No matter their space limitations.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has been absolutely incredible.
It has been.
We've covered so much ground, from assessing our space and gathering basic tools to exploring fascinating natural gardening techniques like companion planting, biointensive gardening, and permaculture.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you.
Likewise.
Remember, gardening is a lifelong learning experience.
For sure.
Don't be afraid to experiment, make mistakes, and try new things.
Yeah, it's all about trial and error.
The most important thing is to approach your garden with curiosity, respect, and a sense of wonder.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
So whether you're a seasoned gardener or just starting out, I encourage you to embrace the adventure of natural gardening.
It's a great adventure.
It's a journey that can bring you closer to nature, to your community, and even to yourself.
Couldn't agree more.
Happy gardening, everyone.
Yeah.